Okay, so today we're going to talk about government and covering government. Uh, we will spread this out over 3 classes, but this first class will kind of be an introduction into covering government. Um, I, Before I start, let me just say that I've gotten a couple of questions about assignments and due dates and that kind of thing. Um, just do the best you can. I am not expecting everything to be in and on time. If you're turning that stuff in and on time, great. You're following the schedule that I laid out, and I appreciate it. And everything. If you're a little late here and there, don't sweat it. The main thing is just to get it in to me as quickly as you can. So, just keep that in mind. I want this to be just the least amount of stress as it possibly can on you guys. So, just do the best you can. Um, and I'm not going to be a big stickler for that. So anyway, also, I want to kind of get an idea of how everything's going. Um, so if you are seeing your other professors, doing some things that you like, if you're seeing some things that I'm doing that you like, let me know. Reach out to me. I told you I thrive off of your feedback, and again, I want this just to be the best it can possibly be. So just really, try to provide me with as much feedback as you possibly can. Communicate and let me know what's going on. Okay, and then the other thing that I wanted to mention, your speech stories, major writing assignment, uh, those are due Tuesday. Again, that's more of a suggestion, but I think that's a pretty ample amount of time to get those in and done. Do the best you can in trying to get those to me by Tuesday. Also, make sure we have an AP style quiz in today's D2L. Make sure you're keeping up with those quizzes. Um, those points add up, so it would definitely help your grade to do the best you can on those. All right, so I think that's all the housekeeping I have. We'll go ahead and get started on the lecture. So, and basically, this one lecture today will cover the the second, I guess you could say. There's a cover page, but the first slide, the first actual slide in your slideshow that I will put on the D2L. There'll also be some supplemental documents on there that I want to make sure you have. One will be Robert's Rules of Order, and one will be open meetings laws and open records laws for the state of Tennessee. So make sure that you get a chance to review that, and we're going to go over a lot of that later in one of the next 2 video lectures that we do. But this first one is just kind of an introduction into government and covering government and everything. So that's where we will start. Now, just to give you some background, I have covered probably hundreds, possibly thousands of government meetings over the course of the 20 years that I have been a journalist. I have covered everything from city council meetings to county commission meetings to school board meetings to county committee meetings to city committee meetings to everything under the sun. So I've got a pretty good knowledge as to to local government, how it works, and that's really a good place to kind of start when you get into covering meetings. My plan was to have you go actually cover a government meeting, but since that has kind of gone out the window, our next major writing assignment will be kind of a virtual meeting, kind of it's just it's a fake meeting. But it's a good assignment and it's a good exercise, and you will find that you will have more than enough to write about when you tackle this. If you want to go ahead and familiarize yourself with it, it's on the last page of this slideshow, and once we get that assigned, I'll make sure that there's a copy prominent in the D2L. But anyway, so where do you start when you go to cover a meeting? If you're sitting in a newsroom and an editor or a producer or whatever comes and says, hey, I need you to go cover this city council meeting or a county commission meeting or a school board meeting or whatever, the first thing you need to do before you do anything else is you need to know who's involved. City mayor, county mayor, commissioners, and all this stuff more times than not is posted online. The city council that I currently cover in Watertown actually has a city councilman, they call him alderman there, has an alderman who is deceased. They haven't updated their website in quite a while, and he's been deceased for almost a year now. So and I keep meaning to bring that up to them, that they need to get that corrected, but it's okay. But most of the time you're going to find up-to-date information about your main players, your mayor, your commissioners, your councilman, your alderman, school board members, those kind of people, and that's very important, so that you can familiarize yourself with who's speaking. Sometimes they'll have their names in front of them when at the meetings. Sometimes they won't. So it's real important to know who they are, and what role they have, what function they have. Dig a little bit, find out kind of a little bit about their politics, and that may be important to know in terms of how they vote. Are they conservative? Are they liberal? Are they do they lean more in a libertarian fashion? So it's really, really important to get the sense of who you're dealing with before you go cover one of these meetings. And then the next thing you need to know is the form of government. Okay, there's it's important to know if let me start by saying this. In Wilson County, there are 3 cities that have city governments. There's 3 cities, period, but they all have a city government. All 3 of them are very different in terms of the way they're structured. So you have in Mount Juliet, for instance, you have a mayor who is effectively a figurehead. He's more like, and they call them city commissioners there. So that's different. So your mayor is effectively a lot like a kind of a sitting voting city commissioner. And then you have, still in Mount Juliet, what they call a city manager, and he he's full time, and he performs kind of the day-to-day responsibilities of what you might think a mayor would perform if the mayor was full time. So the mayor of Mount Juliet is part time, as are the city commissioners, and then they work and vote in that capacity. The city manager doesn't get a vote when they vote on matters, and they are but he generally leads the meetings. He kind of knows all the day-to-day stuff that goes on, introduces items, those kind of things, can make recommendations to the city commission and mayor. So by and large, he's kind of the head administrative figure for the city, but holds no voting power on the city commission. Then you move over to Lebanon, and Lebanon has a mayor who is full time. It actually says in their city charter that the mayor cannot have another job. His job, or her, in this case now, currently it is him, his job is to be mayor, and he performs the functions of much like the city manager does in Mount Juliet. They don't have a city manager, so they have department heads that answer to the mayor, whereas in Mount Juliet they have department heads that answer to the city manager. So a little bit different structure there, and then also something that you need to know is in Mount Juliet, for instance, they have districts where the city commissioners live and represent that particular district of the city. In Lebanon, it's the same way, except they call them city councilmen, and they call the districts wards. If I'm not mistaken, there's the same number of city commissioners in Mount Juliet as there are in Lebanon, I think. I'm thinking now maybe Mount Juliet has one less. I think there's 5 in Mount Juliet. I think there's 6 in Lebanon. But anyway, so you got to know that. And then you go down to little bitty Watertown, and Watertown has a very similar style of government as does Lebanon. There is a mayor. There is no city manager. The mayor presides over the meeting. Both in Lebanon and in all three, the mayor has voting power. In Lebanon, the mayor only votes in the case of a tie. In Mount Juliet and Watertown, I believe the mayor votes on every issue. I know that's the case in Watertown. As I said before, the councilmen in Watertown are called aldermen, and they are elected at large, which means the city's not split up into districts or wards, but the aldermen are elected at large, meaning they basically can come from any part of the city and they serve the city as a whole. Whereas if you have a form of government where city councilmen or city commissioners or whatever are elected, they would represent their particular ward or district. And that's important to know because at election time, that all these people will run for office, and you kind of need to know about what district or ward they represent, or if they're at large, do they represent the city as a whole. So let's see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 aldermen in Watertown, and in addition, and the mayor in addition. So effectively you have 7 voting members of the city council there. So when you get into county commissioners or county commissions, in Wilson County, there's a city mayor, and then there are 25 county commissioners, and they all represent a district in Wilson County. Some counties have more, some counties have less. All of this is based on population. All of it's set up through city or county charters. The only way you can change a charter, city or county charter, is by legislative act. So the legislature would actually have to vote to change the charter for a particular city or county. And that's important to know because it came up not too long ago, because Watertown thought about, they didn't actually do it, but they thought about changing the way people vote there. As it currently stands, Watertown, you can actually live outside the city limits and be able to vote in a city election in Watertown as long as you own property inside the city limits. So you could live in Mount Juliet or wherever, and as long as you, and I believe that's inside Tennessee, it may be even inside Wilson County, but as long as you own property in Watertown, you could go vote there and vote in the city elections. So Watertown, the council thought about changing it to get rid of that rule, to make it to where you could only vote in city elections if you lived in the city limits. They decided they would not pursue that. It would have required a city charter change, which would have been, if the city council would have passed it, then it would have gone by act to the state legislature and one of Wilson County's legislators, more than likely the representative in that district and the senator that represents that district would introduce that in both chambers of the state legislature, and then it would go through the process of being either being passed or voted down. And when you get into state government, that's a whole nother ball of everything. So, and like I said, once you get into larger cities like Murfreesboro, for instance, there's a lot more stuff that's going on. There's a lot more people in the process. Davidson County, Metro Nashville, that's a huge body that so there's a lot of moving parts there. So by and large, population a lot of times determines how big your your city and county governments are, how big your school board is, and how it's funded, which is the next point that I want to make. You want to know how your government is funded. Now, it's not enough to say, oh, we're just funded by taxes. Well, what kind of taxes? A couple of years ago, when I worked for the Lebanon Democrat, the issue of raising the sales tax in Wilson County by ½ cent was on the ballot. It failed. It has since passed. It passed in the primary earlier this year, in, let's see, I think it was at the end of, or in February. So Wilson County's sales tax was raised by ½ cent, and all that money that it generates, you wouldn't think ½ cent would generate a whole lot of money, but in all actuality, it translates to somewhere between $6 and $7 million, and all of that money is earmarked for teacher raises in Wilson County schools and in Lebanon Special School District. So, actually, I think Lebanon Special School District will get a portion of that money, and I don't think it's earmarked in there, but it is earmarked specifically for teacher raises in Wilson County schools. So anyway, sales tax does fund a lot of government. We'll take Wilson County for instance, because I did the story on what funds Wilson County government, or what funds Wilson County, what taxes actually fund the projects and things that happen in Wilson County. In Wilson County, by the way, 85% of the budget in Wilson County, right off the top, goes straight to schools. So you're only really working with about 15% of the budget left over, and all that 15% has to fund your sheriff's department, your jail, your paramedics, your Wilson Emergency Services, let's see, what else? Roads, all of those things have to come from that remaining 15 cents, because it costs a lot to fund schools. And good, that's a good thing. Kids deserve a quality education, and so we want to put as much money as we can toward that. City governments do provide funding for schools as well, but not nearly as much as the county. So sales tax does fund Wilson County government. Also, there's what you call, there's property tax. We'll talk about property tax because a lot of people are familiar with property taxes. And this is the amount that you pay, if you own a home or property. And, that there's actually a property tax rate that's set for the county. And then if you live in a city, depending upon which city you live in, there's an additional property tax that goes to that city. So, let's say your property tax rate is at, 50 cents for the county, and then 22 cents or whatever for the city, then you're paying a 70 cent or 72 cent property tax. And that's it's kind of hard to explain, but it's 72 cents for every $100. I think it's $100 of actual value of the property. It's like, I mean, I don't know if we have to get that specific, but it does get really confusing, and I don't want to tell you wrong, about that. So, but just keep in mind, property taxes would be one way that governments are funded. Wilson County also has a wheel tax. Basically, that's a tax that's charged on vehicles that are driven in Wilson County. So you have, when you go and get your tags for your car, then you would pay an additional amount of money in wheel tax. And then the last way Wilson County's funded is through I can't remember the name of it now, but anyway, it's basically a tax on any new buildings, homes, structures, whatever, that are built in Wilson County. So if you are a contractor or whatever, you're going to have to pay that above and beyond, your costs for materials and labor and whatever to build a home or build a warehouse or build or whatever. And I believe it's all based on square footage, and it all depends on whether it's residential or commercial, and so there's different rates for each. And so but that is another way that government is funded, at least in Wilson County. So I do remember the name of it now. It's called Adequate Facilities Tax. So if you hear that thrown around, and a lot of terminology, listen, it can get mind-boggling, the amount of new terms and terminology that gets thrown out when you go to cover government meetings, because they all have their own language that they speak, so to speak, and you definitely want to know so you can understand and write about the stuff, put it in layman's terms so people can understand it. Because if you have an issue before a city council about an R1 zoning that's going to R3, for instance, well, what does that mean? It means that someone has requested that the city council change the zoning. Each section of town has a specific zoning. Usually where you see houses, those are going to be residential. And then, so each piece of property is zoned a certain thing. If you have an area that has a lot of business, that's going to be that's going to be business zoning. If it has a lot of warehouses and industrial parks and stuff like that, then that's commercial zoning. So there are all kinds of different zonings, and then there's kind of subsets of zoning within those sets. So you have R1, say R1 to R3. That could mean it's going to be a single family home zoned for a piece of property that's zoned for a single family home that's going to a multi-family home, like an apartment complex. And that's real important, because if you have a developer who wants to put a 500 unit apartment complex right in the middle of a neighborhood, then chances are the people in that neighborhood are not going to be very happy about that. Why? Because That's going to increase, the number of people who live around you. It's going to increase the amount of traffic on the road there. It's going to increase. It's going to mean a lot of different things. It's going to mean the an increase in the number of kids who go to that particular school. So it's really important to really know this terminology and know what these guys are talking about and what they could potentially pass, because it could mean it could have some serious implications on the people who live there. So make sure to keep that in mind. And then also, the last thing I want to talk to you about today is you definitely want to start your planning with the agenda. And each entity, each government body is required by law in Tennessee to post an agenda, if they have it, before each meeting. So you can go and you can look at that agenda. Generally, any supplemental information that goes along with that agenda, such as a change in the copy of a resolution or a copy of an ordinance or whatever that's up for vote, is going to be included in that agenda. A school board policy, for instance, you would be able to see what proposed changes there are before that government body votes on a particular thing, and so you can become familiarized with what they're planning on doing, what issues are attached to this decision that this city council or county commission or school board has to make. So those kind of things are really important to, and this is all before you even go to the meeting. So it's really important to know all this stuff before you even head out to that meeting. So make sure that you do your homework, that you are up to speed on everything that's going on before you head out. And then next class we will talk about kind of some of the things, what to look for, when you get there, and actually covering that meeting. And then we'll wrap it up with knowing the laws, Robert's Rules of Order, and that kind of thing in our third class on government. Okay, so other than the AP style quiz, just make sure that you're getting stuff turned in pretty regularly, so that I can get things graded and get them back to you. And I'm going to do my due diligence to try to get things graded as quickly as possible. And I'm sorry if I've had any delays. And please, if you have been sending me regular feedback, keep it coming. If you haven't, please join in the conversation, and we'll go from there. I appreciate everybody's time today, and I hope you have a wonderful day.